Uh, Hello, everyone. So we are about to start the session. So please allow me to introduce myself. I am Keshri Nandan, Senior Investment Specialist at the Private Sector Operations at ADB. On behalf of ADB, I would like to welcome you all to ACF 2023. This is the first one happening after 4 years. And thank you for joining us today. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Ben, Jean, Shasha, and Sumika for taking the time out to present their projects. We will be presenting 4 case studies of the transformative projects committed by ADB during 2022, which are unique and industry firsts and will make the world a greener place to live in. As we know, Asia is one of the most rapidly developing regions in the world. However, this rapid development has come at a cost. It has made Asia the world's largest emitter of greenhouses. Electric power generation and transportation are two of the largest contributors of greenhouses. It is critical to decarbonize electric power generation and electrify a major portion of transportation sector to achieve carbon neutrality. To achieve this, Asia needs to tap into its tremendous potential to generate clean energy through its abundant solar and wind resources. Since agriculture plays an important role in the Asian countries, biomass, which is firm power, will play an important role and can be a unique solution to tackle climate change in the region. In addition to decarbonized transportation, a focused approach for quick ramp up in adoption of electric vehicle is required. However, the countries face shortfalls in climate investments that are needed to clear a pathway to green growth. As Asia's climate bank, ADB has an important role to bridge the financing gap. Today, my colleagues will present 4 case studies. Each will be for 15 minutes, followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. So Q&A, we will be having, you can send it online on the app and we can collate and we can respond to the questions. These case studies will showcase ADB's ability to provide unique financing that includes blended finance to make projects bankable and help the countries to harness their potential to achieve decarbonization. I would now like to invite Ben to present the Monsoon Wind Power Project. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, Keshri, and thank you everyone for joining us here this afternoon. As Keshri was alluding to, my name is Ben Grozier, and I work in ADB's private sector infrastructure finance team based in Bangkok. From there, we essentially cover financings across the Mekong. So in Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos, which we'll be speaking about today. As sort of brief context, I will try to introduce the Monsoon project at sort of a high level first, talk a little bit about the financing process for the project, for which ADB was the mandated lead arranger, the MLA, and give you a little bit of insight into one of the nuances, I think, as particularly relates to this project and our use of blended finance to address a particular risk in the project. Great. So at a high level, what is Monsoon? It's a 600 megawatt wind project built in southern Laos, basically between the Saigon and Attapeu provinces. There are 133 turbines, each of a capacity of about 4.5 megawatts. And the project has a 22-kilometer transmission line, essentially connecting the project site into the Vietnamese well, across the Vietnamese border or into the Vietnamese grid at the border. The project is projected to produce about 1,500 gigawatt hours of power annually, which implies 750,000 tons of CO2 emissions offset each year. And the total project cost was about $950 million, financed on a 70-30 debt to equity basis, implying essentially $670 million of debt mobilized by ADB for the project. I also just wanted to highlight a couple of sort of the firsts or accolades that we hope make this project unique. Firstly, it is the first wind project to be constructed in Lao PDR. Once constructed, it will be the largest wind project in the ASEAN. And it is the first once constructed again, will be the first cross-border wind project established in Asia. On that sort of final point, I wanted to give a little bit of context for essentially the cross-border relationship from which this project stems. So the project will be built in Laos, which has a relatively sort of explicit target of becoming the battery of Southeast Asia. Laos has a history of exporting hydropower, which those exports essentially comprise close to 10% of current GDP. It also has renewables ambitions, targeting growth in renewables outside of just hydro production by 2025, and really, really massive wind potential. So in some of the early sort of feasibility studies in Laos, the predictions or estimates for the scale of utility scale wind range from 100 to sort of 500 gigawatts. So the Monsoon project at a size of about 600 megawatts is essentially scratching the surface here. On the other side, the power will be exported to Vietnam, which, as many in the audience will know, is growing quickly, 8% GDP growth in 2022, and projected 6.5% to 7% in 2023 and 24. Similarly, Vietnam has significant renewables ambition. In its latest power development plan, it's targeting generating up to 39% of its power from renewables by 2030. And an established relationship or power trade relationship with Laos. So the two countries have established an MOU in 2015, essentially agreeing power trade with a target of 3 gigawatts of renewables traded into Vietnam by 2025 and 5 gigawatts by 2030. I wanted to give this essentially as a framework and context for kind of where the Monsoon project comes from and the context in which it sits. I'll move directly to the project though. As I mentioned, it will be constructed in southern Laos, between the Saigon and Attapeu provinces, 22 kilometers from the Vietnam border, which, as you may note, aligns with the length of the transmission line for which the project is responsible. It sits at an elevation of about 1,000 to 1,600 meters on a project area that is up to 68,000 hectares. As may make sense, the footprint of the project, essentially turbines, substations, balance of plant, road, transmission, etc., essentially comprise a much smaller site than that, so just over 1,000 hectares. The site is also located along a main road connecting Thailand into Vietnam, implying reasonable road infrastructure for the transportation of sort of the heavy components required to construct the project. And I left this last point in there essentially as an interesting note that given its location, the sort of unexploded ordnance clearance or UXO clearance will be sort of an important first step in sort of the construction activities that are now ongoing. Okay, so to the project structure itself. The project is essentially written under kind of two major agreements. There is the power purchase agreement, the PPA with EVN in Vietnam, as well as the concession agreement with the government of Laos. The PPA is a 25-year agreement, essentially in which the government of Vietnam agrees to purchase power at a tariff rate of about 6.95 cents per kilowatt hour. That's in USD and paid offshore. It's a take and pay structure, meaning EVN only pays for the power it does take. This, of course, leaves some additional risk in the project, which we'll talk about later. And the PPA, differentiating it from some of the domestic Vietnamese PPAs, is governed by English law and has Singapore arbitration. So if anyone's familiar with the Vietnamese domestic PPAs, it's quite different from those. The concession agreement is similarly a 25-year agreement with the government of Laos. This effectively grants the land and rights to build, own, and operate the project in Laos in exchange for royalties, lease payments, and taxes. The project has also established agreements, EPC and O&M agreements. EPC, the Engineering, Procurement, and Construction Agreement, established with two subsidiaries of Power China, Power China International and Power China Laos. It's fixed price, date certain, fully wrapped, and a turnkey arrangement, mitigating a lot of potential risks in the project. The O&M is divided into two separate parts. The wind turbines, operated and maintained by Envision Energy, and the rest of BOP, balance of plant, including the foundations and transmission line, to be operated and maintained by Power China Laos. In terms of sponsors for the project, at the top we have BCPG, Impact Electrons Siam, and STPNI, which are energy developers and a construction company in Thailand. Ascen Renewables and Ayala Company from the Philippines here, Mitsubishi Corporation from Japan, and S&P Consultation, the local partner in Laos. ADB, as background, has worked on a number of projects with these sponsors in sort of varying capacities beforehand. And then to the financing. So in the top right, we have sort of a diagram of the financing, but ADB essentially did serve as mandated lead arranger and mobilized the $670 million of debt from this group. Tellingly, I'd say the syndication process was 2 times oversubscribed, I think indicating a overwhelming, essentially, supply of financing for projects just like this. So there are 3 buckets to the financing: the MDB DFI financing, which is provided on a 19-year tenor; the commercial financing, some of which participated through ADB's B-loan product, and that portion is provided on a 17-year tenor. And the concessional funding. ADB mobilized $60 million of concessional and sort of blended finance for the project. I'll go into details specifically, but this portion has, or portions of it have tenor up to 21 years. I guess for future reference, I've laid out sort of a long list of the details here, but I sort of spoke about most of them, but one of the ones maybe I'll highlight is just the ENS point on the slide, to sort of support the local community in which the project will be built. There will be a fund established, which the project contributes $1.1 million each year to help support educational programs and scholarships, agriculture and livelihood programs, as well as infrastructure projects in the local community. In terms of financial benefits from the project, about 1/3 are going to the local community, and 2/3 or so will end up sort of supporting the government of Laos, at least in Laos itself. Okay. Great. So yeah, I just wanted to take a quick minute and speak about the blended finance structure and sort of the concessional funding here. So as I mentioned, the PPA is on a take and pay basis, meaning the project is sort of at risk if EVN were to curtail power from the project. There are a number of sort of mitigating factors for this in the project itself. The PPA only permits EVN to curtail for technical reasons, basically related to operations of the Vietnamese grid. The project itself plugs directly into Vietnam's 500 kilovolt high voltage transmission network through the sort of major transmission line built from the project itself. And the tariff is actually lower than a number of other onshore wind, solar, and renewable sources. Having said that, I think curtailment risk essentially remains outside of the control of the borrower. And so the blended finance is there to really bring additional support to the structure and to really bring comfort to lenders otherwise. So there are two sort of portions of this concessional structure. The first is a $30 million tranche applied directly to project costs with a longer tenor and subordinated debt to mitigate the effects of ordinary curtailment. The second portion of the concessional funds is an additional $30 million cash reserve, which helps mitigate in more extreme cases of curtailment. As the last sort of bullet on the slide here references, our estimation based on sort of the inclusion of the blended finance is that the project can withstand about 50% of potential output curtailed, a massively extreme scenario for more than 3 years without triggering a debt default. So we think the concessional funds really brought a lot of stability to the project. And then just in order to wrap up, I wanted to sort of speak about how we sort of see the development impact of the project fitting in with some of ADB's institutional priorities. So there are 3 operational priorities of the bank with which the project aligns. Obviously, tackling climate change and the massive amount of emissions avoided. Accelerating progress in gender equity. A main focus for the financing was sort of establishing gender indicators related to sort of gender policies at the project company, provision of internships that really strengthened and bolstered gender in the project. And lastly, regional cooperation and integration as a sort of cross-border energy infrastructure project. The project qualifies as under sort of ADB RCI. I'm reaching my time limit, so I'll sort of skip over the remaining, but perhaps to note that the project is sort of a net positive for Laos, which will be receiving approximately $70 million of funds from the establishment of the project through royalties, lease payments, and taxes as well. So a sort of marked and significant benefit to Laos. I'm going to wrap up there. If I'm able to move the slides forward, I had a picture of myself on the site. We hiked to one of the Met masts that was measuring the wind, and in coming down, as you might be able to tell in the lower picture, we were soaked in some monsoon-like weather conditions. So hopefully the project sticks to sort of its name. So I'll stop there and then happy to open up to any Q&A for a couple minutes. Oh, please, yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, there's sort of data that's come out from the project that is sort of indicating how nicely wind power exports complement the existing Lao hydro exports. Essentially, wind in Laos is peaks when the rainfall is at its low point. So for the existing hydropower dams, which or reservoirs are full during the summer months, sort of April to September, and Laos is able to export a lot of hydropower during that time, while the sort of wind speeds, particularly in the region of the project, peak between or sort of over the winter months, essentially between October and March, and so complement essentially Laos's hydro export ability quite nicely, especially to Vietnam in this case. Thank you. Please, yeah.
Have you met any problems about land acquisition during your project, and how do you resolve it?
Yeah, thank you. So the project under its concession agreement had sort of rights to the land area for the project site, so awarded by the government of Laos. There were actually interesting dynamics related to sort of overlapping concession agreements, and it had come out in diligence that the government had awarded sort of other concession agreements, particularly actually for there was a mining concession in the region as well as a farming concession. So there was sort of a lot of work put into and time put into working with the government of Laos to essentially establish that they were not overlapping, that areas allocated for the project's use were specifically designated for the project, as well as sort of no overlapping regional areas. So absolutely. In terms of sort of land acquisition on the project site or sort of from local communities, I was, so personally, I was not actually particularly close to sort of our ENS process, but I mean, the project is categorized sort of very strictly under ADB's categorization. So it is AAA, and it went through our ENS process under sort of very rigorous diligence and gap analysis for the land acquisition with any sort of local communities and things like that too. Yeah, I could put you in contact with the right person to speak in more detail about that aspect as well, if that helps. Yeah, please.
It's amazing that how you manage to get two governments to agree on to a project. When we do projects, we deal with only one government and we find it so difficult. So in this case, how long did it take from the time of concept to bring it up to financial close? And how did you all first start with discussing first with Vietnam or with Laos? And is this project driven by the private sector or more by ADB? Because I'm sure there have been a lot of bureaucracy which you have to go through and a lot of challenges will have been there. So maybe if you can enlighten a little bit on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yes, it is wholly a private sector driven project. Our client is a energy developer based in Thailand called Impact Electron Siam was the lead developer. And for context, the discussion started with the government of Laos in 2011. So it took more than a decade to essentially agree on the financing terms. But yeah, for a while, I think the first agreement with the government of Laos was feasibility study, It involved the lead sponsor sort of putting in wind masts and gauging if the project was viable. Fortunately, from a sort of banking perspective, that meant there's a long history of wind data on the site. So feasibility study and sort of agreement with Laos was where our client or lead sponsor started. Finding a potential buyer for the project was also a long process. The project was initially at one point looking at exporting the power to Thailand, to EGAT, and so explored arranging an agreement with the EGAT, Thai utility, before. So that obviously did not reach a happy conclusion, and turned to Vietnam and was able to establish the PPA with EVN in Vietnam. So while both the concession agreement with the government of Laos and the PPA were not finalized until 2021 in the case of the PPA, and 2022 in the case of the concession agreement. So it was an 11+ year long process with the financing closing earlier this year.
Sorry, I think we are running out of time. So this one will be, and in the breakout time, we can have more questions for them. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean Aguirre. I work for the Private Sector Infrastructure Finance Division of ADB, particularly focused on renewable projects in Central Asia. So for this afternoon, I will be speaking about ADB's renewable power intervention in the country, in particular for 2023. Next slide, please. Okay. So for those who are unfamiliar with the country, Uzbekistan is a country in Central Asia of about 35 million people. It is one of only 2 double landlocked countries in the world. Double landlocked meaning it is also surrounded by landlocked countries. And its mostly flat and dry landscape provides plenty of solar and wind resource. But incidentally, the country is also one of the world's largest natural gas producers. In fact, about 88% of the country's energy generation comes from natural gas. In 2021, hydropower was the country's only renewable energy resource and made up only 8% of total power generation. With this current energy mix, as you can see in the chart, and because of the country's vast untapped wind and solar resources, Uzbekistan is well positioned for a truly transformative energy transition. Naturally, this is not as simple as it seems. The country's power sector is relatively young and has not been in good shape to bear and support this transition. And so, since 2019, major reforms have happened and are still ongoing to stimulate and sustain renewable energy investment in the country. In 2017, Uzbekistan signed the Paris Agreement and provided its nationally determined contributions to ensure the implementation of its commitment. Uzbekistan formulated the Green Economy Transition Program for 2019 to 2030. And the 3 relevant climate goals are on the slide. Incidentally, the first point here of 35% greenhouse gases reduction has already been updated in 2021. Upon signing, it used to be 10%, and this sort of illustrates the government's commitment to the energy transition. And also at present, we are also aware that the government has revised its aims from 5 gigawatt of solar to 7 gigawatt of solar power, and from 3 gigawatt of wind to now 5 gigawatts of wind by 2030, and with also midterm goals set for 2026. So in support of the country's climate goals, ADB has extended assistance to 5 renewable projects in 2023 alone. So we have completed 2 wind projects sponsored by Aqua Power and 3 solar projects sponsored by Masdar. Their commercial operations date are slated for late 2024 and 2025. They have typical project finance structures, have 25 to 30-year PPAs, and a key off-taker is the National Electric Grid of Uzbekistan. So since 2020, ADB has supported a total of 7 renewable projects, 4 solar and 3 wind projects, and we have mobilized 331 million of debt financing. In just a little over 5 years from 2020, ADB will have supported the addition of 2,497 megawatts of new renewable energy capacity for the country and the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions by 4.1 million tons per year. In addition, gender action plans will have been implemented across 5 projects, where the project companies will employ gender-inclusive targets and practices as agreed with ADB. So, in the past 2 years of our processing of these renewable energy transactions with the country, we have highlighted 4 important lessons learned. Naturally, there are these typical challenges of the projects, starting off with dealing with a lot of parties, a lot of lenders, a lot of sponsors, as well as the government. But these are our key takeaways. So for the first, competitive tenders with well-developed structures attract strong sponsors and lead to competitive pricing. As an example, 2 of our 2023 solars were under the World Bank's Scaling Solar Program. This program employs an efficient process and provides already a set of bankable documents. Naturally, there will be contention points, but having this set of documents and an efficient timeline for the processing of the project has given confidence to sponsors to bid for the projects and to lenders as well. It has significantly cut processing time, has reduced points of contention, and has set boundaries for negotiation. So comparatively with our non-sponsored tenders, our solars were processed in a significantly shorter amount of time. For the second point, good site selection is key to mitigating most project risks. So as an example, our 2 wind projects in the country are in the very rural portion of the country and has 150 and 220 kilometer transmission lines. And that is one of the major challenges for the project. First, in terms of environment and social safeguards. As you can imagine, the ENS process is a comprehensive process, and the vast area that it covered took a lot of time to process. So we encountered a lot of informal and formal settlers, a lot of species in their natural habitat, and so that really took a lot of time. It is also very costly to have a very long transmission line. It exposes the project to a lot of completion risks and operational risks. It's just that in this case, that was the best location that they could find. But ideally, a very short transmission line would mitigate a lot of the risks for construction and operation. In particular, also, the transmission lines that we have for the projects are not part of the sponsor project company, but is part of the government. And so that as well, aside from being out of the project, being under the government's remit added another risk because it's a significant infrastructure to install. The third point, ensure best-in-class advisors are engaged. So some of our projects have encountered processing delays due to subpar reports of advisors. So these advisors' reports form the foundation of projects, and a significant handicap on this front may lead to problems. Engaging new advisors after we receive subpar reports, this actually happened, will cost both time and money. And so hiring the best in class at the onset, even if it may mean a little more cost, is very important. And lastly, sponsors' experience in developing a particular energy resource is important. So in our experience, while we have tapped sponsors who are well known in the power sector, some of them did not have extensive experience in wind or maybe in solar. They were mostly doing other forms of energy. And this created some prolonged negotiations because of the varied expectations from their experience developing another type of power. And so it was difficult, it took longer to make them come to the same page and reach a balanced risk and acceptable risk allocation because they were trying to employ some of their experience from, for example, gas. And so while, of course, we are trying to promote more sponsors into the sector, into the renewable energy sector, it's good to keep in mind that we may encounter these problems. And so working with highly experienced sponsors would be key. That's it for my presentation. If there are any questions.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I mean, it's quite impressive, the work that has been done there. Despite the resources you said were abundant. But with all this project now lined up, my question is there more to do there? And what should the private sector or the businesses who would like to pursue those opportunities be aware of and be looking for when looking at opportunities?
Okay, so first, definitely there are more to come. We have not really reached the target of the government. What's good about the country is the government is really involved in this, though they still lack the sophistication that is ideal for this. They are very actually strict with their timelines. We've experienced that in all the 5 deals. They were the ones pushing that we meet the timelines because there's also an energy shortage in the country. And so for private sector, it's good to have relations with the government because they're very active in this. There are quite a number of prominent sponsors interested in the country, and in fact, in our pipeline, we are already speaking to them on the next ones. It's just that these 5 are still, we're still working on the final stages of implementation of it, but definitely we already have a few on the pipeline, particularly for solar.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentations. I'm interested in the gender issues. So what was the context of the gender in the country? And, would you elaborate more on the 5 action plans for the gender in these particular projects? Thank you.
Yes, so for the 5 projects that we completed, we have employed gender action plans on each one of them. This includes conducting trainings for the employees for gender awareness. Also includes completing establishing facilities for women, because in practice we have observed that this sector is actually more centered on men, and it has not been, I guess, aware of the needs of women. And so the establishment of for example, separate toilets, separate resting facilities for women are part of the gender action plan. And also we have targets on the minimum number of women in the workforce for each of the projects.
I have a question on the financial side. I hope it's not private and you can share with us. What are the return targets for this sort of a project, and what percentage funding you all did, and what was the funding rate?
I would love to share those with you. We can. I'm not in a position to share that to a big group, but you can contact us to get more insights on that.
Any further question? Okay, one question from my side. How does the transaction help in market development? How can we replicate such more How can we replicate more such transactions in Uzbekistan? How will this help in market development?
The presence of ADB as well as other IFIs in the sector actually stimulated the investment in the country. And so I think aside from the establishing renewable energy, renewable energy capacity, ADB's involvement has actually stimulated that, demonstrated that, investing in Uzbekistan in this sector is a bankable endeavor. And we plan to continue doing that through the projects that we have in the pipeline. And we hope that we're also working with the government to improve their sector. As I said earlier, it's not a very mature energy sector, and we are working with them to improve it and attract more private sector investment.
Thank you, Jean, for the invaluable insights. I would like now to invite Shasha. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we're now moving to the transport side that ADB has engaged into. For this section, I will discuss about the electric mobility green loan transaction in Vietnam that we did last year. This transaction we did with VinFast, or VinFast Trading and Production Joint Stock Company. In this transaction, ADB was a mandated lead arranger, and we did mobilize financing from a group of development finance institutions, as well as the climate finance donors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before I discussed about the detailed projects, I want to give you a bit of a brief of how transport sector work in Vietnam. So don't get me wrong, I like Vietnam a lot. It's a very beautiful country. But in terms of the transport sector of the country, there's still room for improvement. So transport sector, similarly in many countries, is one of the most polluting sector. In Vietnam, transport sector accounted for 18% of the country's GHG emission annually. Why? This is because the population there still prefer to use the private transport. And this is because the public transport is still seen as old and unfavorable. As a result, Vietnam faces the high traffic congestion in major cities. If you look at the level of motorization, the number is very high. There's an average of over 2 motorcycles per family. There are 58 million motorcycles running on the streets in Vietnam every day. If you also look at the car ownership, it is also increasing thanks to the economic development as well as the expansion of the middle income population. Public transportation, on the other hand, is not widely used. It accounted just for 9 to 15% of the transportation demand in major cities. With this, there is an urgent need to address this issue. And this can be done by promoting the use of public transport in the country. However, public transport is still not favorable. So how can we do that? We can introduce the cleaner, less polluting, and more modern to increase the, to enhance the user's experience in using the buses, as well as the other transport mode. And electrification of public transport is also seen to be crucial in the country in achieving the country's commitments in the Paris Agreement, which is to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 8 to 25% by 2030 and reach the net zero emission by 2050. So with this, we work with VinFast to address this issue. We help mobilize $135 million of climate finance package to support VinFast e-mobility business. Our support goes to 2 elements. The first one is the support of the manufacturing of the 150 e-buses, which is the first e-bus fleet for public transport in Vietnam. Secondly, our funding goes to the manufacturing of the Vietnam's first EV charging networks. We accounted for 1,200 electric vehicle charging locations countrywide. The company we're working with is VinFast, as mentioned earlier. It is the company as established in 2017, the first and largest domestic automobile and EV producer of the country. VinFast, as you may have known, is part of Vingroup. This is the largest conglomerate in Vietnam. And VinFast is part of Vingroup's strategy to expand from the property and hospitality business into the high-tech manufacturing sector. ADB supported VinFast in 3 main ways. The first one is the support on the syndication of the climate finance package. This consisted of first, $20 million from our loan. Second, $87 million from parallel lenders consisting Export Finance Australia, FinFund, OEEB, and Responsibility. On top of our loan and the loan from parallel lenders, we also mobilized $28 million from concessional finance donors. This can be divided into 3 sources. The first one is the concessional loan from Australia Climate Finance Partnership. The second one is the concessional loan from the Clean Technology Fund. And last but not least, the grant from Climate Development and Innovation Fund supported by Goldman Sachs and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Hand in hand with our loan financing and grant, we also work closely with our public sector colleague from Southeast Asia Department, Vietnam Resident Mission in implementing the technical assistance to help VinFast. The technical assistance focus on raising the awareness of the customers of e-mobility and also promoting the role of women who is working or studying in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. The other support that we provided is to help VinFast in successing the verification of the green loan. So with our support, this is what it looks like. We help Vietnam in electrification of the public transport in Vietnam. And the change is quite dramatic. If you see from the left of the screen, country Vietnam is filled with fossil fuel public transport. In major cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, there were around 2,000 buses in each city. The cities are filled with the old engine, highly polluting, and also obsolete vehicles, not very pleasant to use at all. As a result, people still use the private transport mode, and this causes the high traffic congestion as well as the high pollution. So our financing provide 150 e-buses to Vietnam roads, and the buses, as you can see, it's very clean, it's very modern, and more details would be explored in the next page. So here are the more pictures of, I think I have to go back, sorry, yep. Here are more pictures of the e-buses and EV charging network under our support. On the left-hand side, this is the picture of our VP, VP Lavasa, in his visit to Vietnam last year. The e-buses here are fully electric buses. It runs on 281 kilowatt-hour battery capacity, which allows it to run for over 200 kilometers per one charge. The buses are based on clean energy, it produces zero emission, and it is environmental friendly. The buses can reduce greenhouse gas emission by more than 60% of the fossil fuel buses. On top of that, the safety features are also enhanced in these e-buses. First one is the CCTV for security reasons. And the second one is the monitoring system to the drivers to ensure that they don't drive recklessly. Also, these buses, unlike the conventional buses, they can also lower their floor to welcome people with disabilities in accessing and exiting the buses. The second element of our support goes to EV charging network, and these are the charging network for the electric cars nationwide. The EV charging network that we support ranges from the smaller type for overnight charges and the fast charger types, which would be put into the public places. In terms of the development and additionality by ADB, we supported the electric mobility transaction in Vietnam, which is ADB's first electric mobility transaction in Vietnam also, as well as the first e-bus transaction of ADB in Southeast Asia. To Vietnam itself, we supported the first electric bus fleet for public transport and also the first EV charging network in the country. The second one is we help the country reduce GHG emission and air pollution and support Vietnam in achieving its commitment to reach net zero emission by 2015 to 50. Thirdly, we also promote economic development in Vietnam, helping the country reach the goal of being the high-tech industries and graduated from lower middle income country to a middle income country. And lastly, this is considered a climate finance transaction. And this is in line with ADB's target to achieve $100 billion of financing, climate financing within 2030. In terms of additionality, there are three types. The first one is that this is considered the first DFI loan provided to VinFast. We help VinFast establish a relationship with the development finance institution. And therefore, on the other hand, we also help the DFI support the e-mobility transaction, which is quite rare in the region. Secondly, with our help, we led the DD process, and we also help ensuring that the environmental and social standard of VinFast is in line with our rigorous ENS safeguard policy. And lastly, we also provide the longer tenure financing compared to what commercial lenders provided. And this also help provide flexibility for VinFast in entering the EV business during ramp-up period. So I've come to the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed the eBus journey with me, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Questions from audience, please.
Again, it's very interesting also. Questions on the commercial viability of this case, specifically for the EV charging station, because the business model probably is quite challenging. And how would you see this, and how can banks, and if you invite also collaboration from some commercial lenders into the structure, how would you see this fly? Thank you.
Thank you. That's actually a very good question. And personally, I received a lot of questions from the audience, the very same question. My answer would be that the commercial viability of the EV itself is still challenging, but we have like the tailored structure in order to help ensuring the success of VinFast in entering into the e-bus business. So if you look at the operation itself, transport sector in general is exposed to the ridership, is also exposed to the technology risk. All the risk needs to be addressed during our processing, and due diligence needs to be made to make sure that our tailored structure can address these issues. I would say that to support the project on the project level may not be feasible in the longer term. What we're doing is that we look at Vingroup as a company and make sure that the cash flow and the financing on the company side is in our comfort sufficient to ensure that our operation is successful. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Sorry, about the charging infrastructure. She was also a question on charging infrastructure.
The charging infrastructure is also has to go hand in hand with the expansion of the EV itself. So for this particular transaction, VinFast also provided the charging network, and it has been under the operation since June last year. Before the charging network is established, there needs to be some grid assessment to make sure that it's enough power supply. While this hasn't been under our due diligence because our transaction focused on the manufacturing side of things. But given that the charging network has run with no problem, we as lenders are satisfied with the result.
Is the project economically viable? Do the projects produce enough income to pay ADB loan?
I have to answer yes to this one. Yeah, so there are two elements in the transaction. The first one is the operation side. If you look at the bus operation, and you look at the fare itself, it would still be challenging to support us like at this stage. But because in this transaction, we didn't look at the operation to support the repayment of our loan. What we look at is the operation of Vingroup as a whole. And Vingroup itself is the largest conglomerate in Vietnam. It has the largest land bank in the country, and it's also the major players in the real estate development, commercial real estate, as well as hospitality. So our structure is tailored on that side, and the repayment is tailored on that side. So in short, yes, it is enough.
Any other question?
Thank you. So we discussed these opportunities around early 2021, and we closed the deal in October last year. So it took around a year and a half. The conversation, including like identifying, the risk, discussing the risk internally, and make sure that everyone comes to the same comfortable position. But what I would like to highlight here is, as the development bank, we need to be sure of and be comfortable and understand our role. As a development bank, there is a need for us to enter and help, catalyze the development of the electric vehicle, while commercial banks or other people are still not 100% sure. And it is a role for us to bridge the financing from the commercial bank and show that this is a success. We can use this as the demonstration effect to make sure that there are more of the project of this type in the future. The challenge here, I would say, is to make everyone understand the role and make everyone feel comfortable about the EV business as well as the overall structure, which results in the long discussion until the tailored structure is made.
Thank you, Shasha, for the invaluable insights. I would like now to Sumika to please go ahead with her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshari, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sumika Nakane. I'm based in Manila, but covering infrastructure project in South Asia, like India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives. So now from our electric bus, we are moving back to power generation, in particular for the biomass power. So what is your impression about biomass power? Not so widely used, or too risky, or not bankable? Those could be true in some cases, but there are some measures to those challenges unique to biomass power. Indeed, biomass power can be a powerful measure to unlock decarbonization opportunities with some extra bonus that you will see out later. Today, I would like to introduce the project supported by ADB recently, SAEL Biomass Energy Project in India, and some lessons we learned from the project. Just to give you some background, here is a context about renewable energy and biomass energy in India. Government of India sets a target to reduce carbon intensity in the economy by 45% by 2030. In specifics, through establishing 500 gigawatt non-fossil energy capacity and 50% of cumulative installed power capacity coming from renewable energies. The graph in the slide shows power generation breakdown in India by generation type. Wind and solar powers together accounts for over 25% of the power generation capacity in India. On the other hand, biomass, although it has a potential in India, which is equivalent for 28 gigawatt, but it is still untapped. And currently, only 3% of the total capacity installed in India comes from biomass power, or which is equivalent to 11 gigawatt. And many of you must have heard about severe air pollution. Yeah, many of you must have heard about severe air pollution in Delhi, or some of you even have experienced it yourself. I did as well. And northern part of India, states like Haryana or Punjab, they are called food basket of India, meaning agriculture plays very important roles in the economic activities. Stubble burning in those states is one of the main causes for this air pollution in India, in Delhi. Large portion of the agricultural residue is burnt on farm or in those states during the short period between the harvest and sowing for the next crop season, which is like less than 1 month usually. As local farmers, they just do not have any other options for the disposal of agricultural residues. And this causes severe air pollution in Delhi. And this on-farm landing is not for free for those farmers, but they need to pay some expenses such as labor cost or fuel cost to burn the agricultural residues on the ground. So those photos just shows gives you, I hope this gives you some image about what's happening in northern part of India in many states. With all of those background considered, biomass power can be an effective solution for the current situation because it can supply baseload renewable energy round the clock, and it could reduce stubble burning causing severe air pollution. And last but not least, it can provide additional income to the farmers instead of burning the agricultural residues on the ground at their own cost, because they can sell agricultural residues as a feedstock for those biomass energy projects. In this slide, I would like to briefly touch base on the common process of biomass power generation. Starting from the left, agricultural residues are purchased from local farmers and converted into bales, this round shape like a structure, for easier transportation. Then those bales are transported to collection centers, which is closer to biomass plants. And this transportation often involves local farmers, creating additional job opportunities for them. The agricultural residues, they are kept in the storage centers with regular quality checkup, including a moisture level. And finally, agricultural residues are moved to on-site storage and fed to the boilers after the quality screening. Steam created from the hot combustions is directed to the steam turbines, and then electricity is generated. In a nutshell, this is how power is generated from the agricultural residues. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now let's move on to the project supported by ADB. It is SAEL Biomass Energy Projects in India. We just signed the loan agreements this March, so this comes really fresh. The project consists of 5 biomass energy projects in various locations in Rajasthan states in India. It's like northwest part of India. And each with capacity of 14.9 megawatt, in total 74.5 megawatt for 5 power projects. And SAEL Industry is a sponsor and 100% shareholders of the project. And the company is a renewable energy arm of SAEL Group. The group has more than 30-year experience in agri-processing business in northern India. And through its operation, the group established very strong network with the local farmers. And the project uses 3 types of feedstock: mustard stalk, groundnut husk, and paddy straw. And the project executed fuel supply contracts with the SAEL Industries, which is also a sponsor of the project. And electricity generated from the project will be sold to state-owned distribution companies in Rajasthan based on 25-year power purchase agreement. EPC and O&M will be undertaken by SAEL Industries Limited, with key technologies supplied from European companies such as Siemens for the turbine and PWE for the boilers. In terms of the regulatory framework, Rajasthan state has a state policy to promote biomass energy in the states, so which includes exclusive feedstock catchment area of 90-kilometer radius from the plant location. It depends on the size of the power plant, and also must-run status not being subject to merit order dispatch for any biomass power project with less than 15 megawatt capacity. So as ADB, we provided loans for the project of Indian rupee 7,540 million, which is around 90 million US dollars. And as mentioned before, it was signed in March 2023. And we recently, actually last week, we achieved financial close. All the condition precedents has been met, and then we will disperse very soon. Notably, this is ADB's first private sector loan support to a biomass project in India. This project has significant development impact mainly in 3 areas. So first, it helped avoiding greenhouse gas emission of up to 487,000 of CO2 equivalent every year, which could have been otherwise emitted from conventional thermal power plants. And second, the project contributed to farmers' income increase because around 20,000 farmers will sell agricultural waste as a feedstock to the projects. So this comes as additional revenues for them. And last but not least, employment opportunities will be created. Around 2,750 jobs will be created during construction, and 1,250 jobs will be created during operation. I personally attended a consultation process with a local community as a part of due diligence, and the most frequently asked question was this employment opportunities. So I could tell like interest is very high from the local communities as well. Then what is like a value added by ADB through support of this project? First and most importantly, demonstration effect is there. To reduce the risk perception about the biomass power projects in India and raise awareness about the benefits of biomass power projects so that it could be scaled up in the future, India, not only in India, but in other developing member countries of ADB as well. And through ADB's support, internationally recognized environment and social standards are adopted by the project. We made sure the project will be implementing ADB's safeguard policy statement. So we believe this added to like set a higher standard for the project and also for the industry as well. In addition, we worked very closely with the project to set gender action plan. So for example, the project will procure a certain amount of the feedstock or other goods from the women-owned micro business, or the project will be committed to promote awareness about the gender-related topic among the farmers. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before concluding the presentation, I would like to share with you some challenges we learned, which is unique to biomass power and biomass power projects, and lessons we learned through the processing of this SAEO biomass energy project. Key challenges include volatility of feedstock volume, price, and quality because of the seasonality and lack of long-term fuel supply agreement in many cases. And supply chain could be also an issue depending on the availability of proper transportation measures or storage capacity. And technology can be a challenge because of the lack of standard about bioenergy system covering various types of feedstock, because the calorific values or some like moisture content can be different from the like feedstock to feedstock. And like lastly, it's related to our role, but less financing option is there, which leads to limited availability of financing amount or higher financing costs because of the high risk perception about the project in the market. Through due diligence and financing structure of the project, we came to learn some lessons to mitigate those challenges, which is unique to biomass energy projects. So first point and most important point is partnership with a sponsor with strong experience, extensive network with local farmers, and robust financials helps to mitigate many of the risks, which is unique to biomass power projects. And selection of the robust technology and equipment supplier with strong track record is a key for the technical success of the project. Project site selection is equally important, which considers availability of the feedstock and required logistics. And lastly, assessment of the regulatory framework is important to make sure that there is certain scheme to support the promotion of biomass power project in the project location. This brings to the end of my presentation, and extra bonus I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, in addition to unlocking decarbonization opportunities, that's like income to the farmers, as you might have noticed. And I just finished my presentation here, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
So please allow me another question on this one. From your presentation, it's obvious that you've done a thorough investigation of this project. So I'm certain that it will be successful. And you also brought forward the feedstock as a challenge. And I had some questions there. To which extent is there redundancy on the available feedstock in terms of additional volumes or alternative fuels in case there should be changes and challenges? And related to that, incentives to the farmers. You mentioned sales and income. Is it only that, or are there also some negative incentives in terms of a possible ban on agricultural burning in order to solve that problem as well at the same time? Yeah, I'll leave it there. I have a spare question for later if possible.
Okay. Thank you for your question. And for the feedstock, yeah, you are right. This is one of the key risks, which is very unique to biomass power projects. And it determines the success of the project. How we got comfortable with this SAEO biomass energy project is first, the sponsor has experience of operating existing biomass power project in nearby states. And how they managed it and how they will manage it for our project is they purchase the feedstock not by month to month, but they purchase in a bulk so that they can get the feedstock when the price is cheapest, and then they store it for a 1 year period. In that way, they could get the best quality feedstock at the best price, and they know how to maintain the quality. So that's how they optimize the operation, and that's how they try to avoid redundancy of the procurement of the feedstock. So that's how we got comfortable. In addition to that, there is a plan B in case feedstock is not available anywhere in the States, which is not likely, but if that ever happens, they could also procure feedstock from the nearby states such as Haryana or Punjab, where the feedstock is abundant. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, in India, there is a feedstock which is potential equivalent to 28 gigawatt, while actually there's only 11 gigawatt of biomass power project in operation. So there's a sufficient buffer for the feedstock in the country, especially in the northern part of the country. And second point about incentive, positive, negative incentives about the farmers. So positive, apparently, they get additional income, and also they can save the cost that they currently bear for burning the feedstock stubble on field, because they need to pay for the labor costs, they need to pay for the fuel costs just to burn the those agricultural residues. Currently, it doesn't come as a free, so they can save the cost. they can like get additional income, and also there can be like job opportunities such as transportation or operation of the storage facility at the project site. So that comes as like additional economic opportunities for the farmers. And like another like incentives the company tries to provide is they actually are doing quite good job for outreach to the local farmer community. So they reach out like explaining about the benefit of the project, and they sometimes provide financial support in the form of the like interest-free loan, so that farmers can purchase the equipment to make the bells on the ground. So like there are like various incentive scheme to the farmers, so that they are like more motivated to sell the feedstock to the projects. Yes.
Do you know the exact price of electricity in India? And in fact, in China, most biomass power plants will have very little profits if it's only to produce electricity. They will provide heat and industry steam to increase profits.
Thank you. So I understand the question is how in India, like profitability of biomass power project is ensured. So for this point, actually it relates to like one of the lessons learned like during the presentation, but we think it is very important to assess the regulatory framework in the like states where the plants will be located. So for the case of the Rajasthan, actually tariff for the biomass power project, it's very like set very high level compared with other generation sources, even like compared with renewable energies. It's more than like a double of the tariff of like a renewable energy. And why government like would do that? Because as you can see, actually like half of the tariff of the biomass energy project in Rajasthan, it covers like for the fuel cost. Eventually, like that portion of the tariff is going to farmers as like in exchange for the feedstock like they provide. And it benefits the farmer not only for the farmers, but like if the project sponsor developer makes some efforts to keep the feedstock cost low, and then that can also benefit the project developers. So it gives some incentives for like project developers to like optimize their operations, and also make sure that like to attract more market players to like biomass power projects, so that it can like scale up.
I have a question is, you know, for the agricultural waste, there are different kind of the agricultural waste, and you have to use different, you know, biomass technology to generate the energy from this resource. Based on your project, what kind of the technology, or maybe what, you know, multiple technology type you use for this, you know, project? How many, or maybe just one or two? Can you explain? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like a very like a key question related to technology. I try to avoid going into like too detail, but actually there's only one technology used for this project. But like what our project developer try to do is in discussion collaboration with the technology provider. They try to find this like a window that technology can like cover 3 feedstocks. And of course, like depending on the calorific value, like technology will be different to efficiently operate. But they found like this one technology which can cover 3 feedstock, which could also avoid like a feedstock risk, because if the mustard like a stock is like it's in like shortage, and then they can use paddy straw. So there was like a very like some like calculation discussion done for the like technology selection between the developer and then technology suppliers.
Hi, thank you for sharing. Like in India, China also has a serious problems of straw burning, especially in winter seasons in China. So My question is, as you just mentioned, there are like 4 key links of the biomass project, like straw collection, transportation, storage, and then finally power generation. And based on our findings, a large proportion of the project cost lies in the transportation link. So for example, in China, if the transportation distance between the collection point to the power plant is over 30 kilometers, it's not economically feasible. So I wonder if you encounter same problems in India, and what's your insights on this? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, like transportation is one of our due diligence question to the client. So there are like a few aspects. So one, yeah, you are like a distance between the those feedstock supply places operate the farmers grow their crops, and then power plant. It's has huge impact on the project economics. So so this relates to one lessons learned. So projects site location is very important to make sure that distance between the project and feedstock supply area is not too far. And also transportation, availability, and also road condition, because if there's well to say paved road, and then the cost can come lower and less time is required. So project location selection is one important factor. And the other factor is again related to the earlier point about the tariff. So tariff setting by the state government is important to make sure that transportation cost is covered, well covered by the tariff. So that project location assessment and regulatory framework assessment would be the key to analyze the successful biomass power projects.
I recall you mentioned the loan was in Indian rupees. So does it mean that the ADB takes the exchange risk, or you have some way to pass it on to the developer? My second question is, I also run it comes from my experience running a biomass power plant using grown fuel wood. You mentioned about you stocking for 1 year. Now, our experience was when you stock wood for 1 year, it starts deteriorating and you have weight loss, and then the cost of the wood goes up. Have you all considered that, and if you have looked at any mitigation strategies for that?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So the first point, Indian rupee loan. So we do provide Indian rupees loan to many projects. Actually, most of the project we support in India, it's by the through Indian rupees loan, local currency loan, and we do not to say ADB has operation to make a funding arrangement for Indian rupee, and of course, same as US dollar loan, we usually the borrowers bear the funding cost for any funding arrangement done by ADB. So in that sense, it's not incorrect if we say the cost of the Indian rupee funding is borne by the client. But one thing that we cannot ignore is ADB has a AAA rating. So comparing with ADB going out to the market to raise Indian rupee financing, and just usual commercial companies are going out to the market to raise Indian rupee financing, the funding cost, underlying funding cost would be different. So the client needs to bear the cost, but they also benefit from ADB's AAA rating to fund the Indian rupee loan. And second point about quality of the feedstock, I think it also depends on the location of the storage facility. So for example, Rajasthan, it's less humid. So that makes it easier to keep the feedstock dry. Of course, there are certain measures on the developer side to maintain or do the quality check on the feedstock. So they regularly check the moisture level, and they elevate the platform to store the feedstock. So certain kind of measures are undertaken to make sure that quality is kept as which is feasible for the power biomass power generation. I hope this answers your questions.
So, yeah, I can also answer that. So, ADB does not take the exchange rate, neither does the client. It is hedged. So there is a counterparty through which the hedging happens. is treasury operations, so there is no loss. So I think that was the last question. Thank you, Sumika.
Okay, thank you very much.
So thanks to all our colleagues for taking the time out for presenting the interesting presentations. I think Sumika is definitely doing something good for cleaning Delhi air. Sasha is doing to clean the Vietnamese air. Jean is doing something for development of market in Uzbekistan, while Ben has, toiled for 1 decade to, for cross-country wind development project, which is unique in itself. So I hope the session was useful and provided glimpse of the projects which ADB is undertaking. And we would like to undertake more such projects. You can feel free to reach out to us for more information of such projects. The presentations will be available. And, feel free to reach out to us, any of us, or the organizers. And we will be more than happy to answer your questions. So we end the session. Oh, sorry, we have some questions from the audience, right? Yeah. So Ben, we have some questions from that.
Okay, I understand before we break, there were a couple maybe unaddressed questions on the Monsoon project. The first one, how did you get Vietnam to alter their standard PPA structure? So maybe firstly, this was, or the PPA for the Monsoon project was a long negotiation between the lead sponsor, IES, and EVN. ADB is not directly involved in that negotiation. So I guess while that's the case, I would say for financing a project of this scale and with the lead sponsor at the time, sort of a kind of growth business or energy developer in Vietnam, I think the recognition was that this project would need international financing, and establishing some of the changes in the PPA, I guess, really strengthened the PPA for the developers to actually accommodate that international financing. So hopefully a precedent set there for other projects. The second question, and maybe I can also speak with someone after this, but Vietnam does not allow to buy directly. The power from the project will be transmitted directly to the Vietnamese grid, and they will be sort of buying it directly. So hope that is clear, but happy to clarify that point for anyone else. And then, yes, lastly, the presentations, I believe all presentations will be shared after the event. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Now we will go out for lunch break. Thank you. Sorry.